Welcome to Regarding Relationships, the podcast where we dive into all things relationships. The ones we choose, the ones we're born into, and the messy ones we're still figuring out. I'm your host, Haley, a licensed therapist, author, and soon-to-be doctor of social work. Yep, I'm almost there. I've spent years working with individuals, couples, and families, and I've seen firsthand what brings us closer and what pushes us apart. Together, we'll explore the mess and magic of human connection. So, let's get into it. Hey everyone, I'm so glad you're here. I'm your host, Haley, and thanks for making me part of your day. Welcome to Attachment Patterns in Dating. Before we dive in, just a quick note. This space is minimal on purpose. Just simple visuals and the sound of my voice. It's designed this way to help you slow down and settle your nervous system. So whenever you're ready, let's begin. Let's begin with why we keep dating the same way. I talk to so many people who come into therapy totally baffled by their relationship patterns. They say things like, why do I always seem to attract partners who don't treat me well? Why does every relationship feel like a roller coaster? Why do I end up repeating the same mistakes even when I want things to be different? If any of that sounds like you, know that you're definitely not alone. This is a very common question in therapy and just everyday life. The good news is there's a reason behind these patterns, and it comes down to attachment. So, what is attachment really? Let's just keep it super simple. Attachment is the way we learn to connect to other people. It's how safe or unsafe we feel when it comes to love and closeness. It's kind of like a blueprint or a map that gets created when we're young. And it's based on how our caregivers showed up for us. So if our caregivers were reliable and loving and consistent, we probably developed, and developed is the key word here, what's called a secure attachment. And this means that we're generally comfortable with closeness and trust. Now, if our caregivers were inconsistent, sometimes there, sometimes not, sometimes warm, sometimes not, we might have learned to be anxious about relationships. Now, if our caregivers were distant or emotionally unavailable, we may have developed an avoidant way of relating. We may have learned to hold back our feelings or avoid getting too close as a way of protecting ourselves. Now, even though these attachment patterns formed early in life and were shaped by the way we first experienced love and safety and connection, they don't just disappear when we grow up. They stay with us, quietly influencing how we show up in dating, relationships, and even friendships. That's why you might notice the same themes playing out again and again, even when you're trying to do things differently. These patterns are familiar, and sometimes what's familiar feels safer than what's new and unfamiliar, even if it doesn't actually make us happy. Getting to know our own attachment style can really help us, especially if we're trying to break patterns. It gives us a way of understanding how we've been showing up in a relationship, even without realizing it. But it's just as important to learn about other people's styles too. Because relationships are a two-way street, and how we connect is going to be influenced by how the other person connects as well. And when you're able to see both sides, your patterns and theirs, things like distance and anxiety, or maybe even ease, begin to make more sense. And that understanding is a powerful first step toward change and toward building healthier, more secure relationships. So let's go over now the 3 main attachment styles and what they look like in dating. We'll explore each one, and you might recognize parts of yourself in one, or even see patterns from people you've dated. There's no judgment here. What we're trying to do is raise awareness. So with that in mind, let's get curious about the anxious attachment. At At its core, anxious attachment often comes from a deep, deep longing to feel safe and close. But it's like trying to hold on to warmth that sometimes just feels out of reach. It's not neediness. It's a nervous system that learned to stay alert to love that didn't always feel consistent. So it makes sense that this can show up as overthinking, seeking reassurance, or feeling on edge when someone pulls away. It's not because you're too much, but because connection feels like something that you have got to hold on to tightly. All right, let's take a closer look at how this attachment pattern might show up in behaviors, especially in dating and relationships. Overthinking a text that didn't get a quick reply is certainly an example. Other examples include feeling a deep fear of being too much or being left behind, needing frequent reassurance, even when things are going well. Reading into small changes in tone, mood, or communication. Feeling unsettled or anxious when there's emotional distance. Trying to fix things quickly to avoid conflict or disconnection. Becoming preoccupied with the relationship, even when it feels, especially when it feels uncertain. In general, people with this attachment style tend to worry a lot about whether their partner really cares or might leave them. They often want lots of reassurance, maybe texting back and forth. It might also show up as jealousy or clinginess. But the deeper fear here is being abandoned or just not being lovable enough. Okay, let's get curious now about avoidant attachment. At its heart, avoidant attachment often forms when closeness either felt overwhelming or unpredictable at some point. So distance started to feel safer than connection. It's not that you don't care, it's that somewhere along the way you learned to rely on yourself because that felt more secure. That's why it makes sense if you tend to pull back when things get too close, or if you need space to process your feelings, or if you feel uneasy depending upon others. It's how you learn to protect yourself. Let's take a look at how this attachment pattern might show up in behaviors, especially in dating and relationships. Some examples might include needing space after a deep or emotional conversation, struggling to say "I miss you," even when you feel it, keeping your guard up or feeling uncomfortable with too much vulnerability, prioritizing independence to the point where closeness feels like a threat, ending relationships when they start to feel too emotionally intense, even if nothing's, quote, wrong, feeling drained by too much emotional need from your partner, even if you care about them deeply. In general, people with avoidant attachment really value their independence. They might pull away when relationships get too close or too emotional. They can seem distant or emotionally closed off, and they might even avoid deep conversations or commitment altogether. Their underlying fear is losing themselves or getting hurt. Okay, and finally, let's get curious about secure attachment. At the core of secure attachment is a feeling of safety and trust. It's a quiet confidence that your needs will be met and that people can be counted on. And once again, this usually comes from early life experiences where caregivers were responsive, consistent, and emotionally available. Secure attachment can also grow naturally when someone feels seen, heard, and cared for in a steady way. Secure attachment does not mean that things are perfect, just that there is a basic sense of safety and knowing that you can trust yourself and others to be there even when things get tough. And it's the goal for most people because securely attached folks feel comfortable with closeness and trust. They can express their feelings and their needs openly, and they listen to and honor their partner's needs and feelings as well. So let's take a closer look at how this attachment pattern might show up in behaviors, especially in dating and relationships. Some examples might include feeling comfortable sharing your thoughts and feelings openly, trusting your partner, and feeling trusted in return. Handling conflict calmly and working together to find solutions. Giving and asking for space when needed without worry. Feeling confident in the relationship, even during tough times. Being able to support your partner while also taking care of yourself. The most important thing I want to stress here is that secure attachment is not necessarily just something that you're born into or born with. You can develop it over time. Develop it. And this is especially through healthy relationships and self-work. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about where our attachment styles come from. I've already mentioned that they do come from our early life experiences, and the people who cared for us. But please keep in mind that our caregivers were carrying their own struggles too, which may have made it difficult for them to always be there in the way that we needed. But ultimately, if our caregivers loved us, but then sometimes were overwhelmed or distant, or if they were sometimes warm and then other times we just couldn't get a read on them, or they seemed, unsure or distant, that's going to inform our worldview, and it's going to change our worldview. And that's because as children, we rely on those caregivers to feel safe. And when it wasn't consistent, when their love wasn't consistent, or their attention, or their emotional availability, we as children developed ways to cope with these ups and downs. Ways to either keep their love close or ways to protect ourselves from feeling hurt. So, for example, if anxious attachment is resonating for you, it's almost like your heart is saying, I will do whatever it takes to keep this love from slipping away. Does that make sense? And if you have an avoidant attachment, it's almost like your heart is saying, I will keep my distance so I don't get hurt. Because again, when that love is unpredictable, sometimes there, sometimes not, it may have felt safer to just say, you know what? No, thanks. Either way, neither one is right or wrong. These are just ways that we learn to survive and protect ourselves as best as we could. So let's talk a little bit about now why some attachment styles end up together. Have you ever noticed how sometimes in relationships, one person wants closeness more while the other seems to pull away? This is often called the anxious-avoidant dance, and it can feel confusing and even painful because it's tapping into old fears for both people. The anxious person might feel afraid of being left, and so they're reaching out more, while the avoidant person feels overwhelmed. They need space, and so they're pulling away more. This push and pull can keep going because even though it's uncomfortable, it feels familiar to both parties, like a pattern we've known for a long, long time. But again, why are these two styles drawn to each other? Well, at a deeper level, both are unconsciously trying to heal something from their childhood. They are hoping that this familiar feeling relationship will have a different outcome for them, finally. So the anxious partner hopes this time someone will stay, even when they get close. And the avoidant partner hopes this time they can be close without feeling smothered or unsafe. But instead of healing, the cycle tends to reinforce their core wounds. The more anxious person, is reaching out more and more, and that just makes the avoidant person pull away more and more. And as they're withdrawing, this makes the anxious person panicky, even more anxious. So each partner feels that feeling the very thing they were trying to escape. Abandonment for the anxious and fear and pressure for the avoidant. So neither one can truly heal in this dynamic. Not because they don't care, but because the relationship is built on a nervous system response, not emotional safety. Awareness is the first step toward change. When we recognize the pattern, we can begin to step out of it and into something more secure. So let's talk a little bit about how we might be able to notice these attachment patterns early in dating. Because when you're just getting to know someone, it's not always easy to tell how they connect emotionally. But with a little attention, you can start to notice subtle cues, not just in what someone says or does, but in how you feel around them. So we've explored what certain attachment patterns can look like once you're into a deeper relationship, but these early signs can help you spot the pattern sooner before you're invested. So here's just some things to look for. Anxious attachment. You might notice that, someone with an anxious attachment is seeking frequent contact or reassurance. They might seem especially sensitive to how you respond. They might get nervous. If there's a delay in communication, they might wonder if something's wrong. So an example might be if you're dating someone new and, you're hearing something like, "Are you upset with me?" after a short pause in texting, you might be curious as to whether that's, coming from a place of anxious attachment. Okay, avoidant attachment. If you're dating someone who, may have an avoidant attachment, they may enjoy time together, but they may pull away when things start feeling emotionally close. You might feel like there's a wall when you try to go deeper, or you might notice them dodging conversations about feelings or, the future. An example of this might be you're dating someone and you hear them say, things like, "I just go with the flow," when you're asking them about where things are heading. And these aren't surefire, indicators, but something to be curious about. And now let's talk a little bit about secure attachment. If you're dating someone and you're noticing they're communicating with ease and consistency, if they are generally clear about their interest in you, if they're open about how they feel and they don't leave you guessing, if they respect both time together, that closeness and space, you may be dating someone with a secure attachment. And an example of something you might hear is, "Hey, I had a busy day, but I'm looking forward to seeing you this weekend." They're checking in, they're letting you know. They're okay with time apart. They're looking forward to time together. Just something to notice and again, be curious about. Again, the key is not to label people too quickly, but to pay attention to how interactions with them make you feel. Do you feel calm and grounded, or do you feel confused and on edge? That emotional clarity can tell you a lot. And ultimately, we want to turn insight into self-awareness that, helps us in our relationships. And, now that you've explored how different attachment styles can show up in others in dating, the key is to bring that insight back to yourself. Instead of rushing to label your style, try gently noticing the patterns that tend to come up for you. When things start to feel emotionally close, do you feel comforted, or do you get overwhelmed and need space? When someone pulls away or goes quiet, do you feel calm, or does your mind start spinning with worry? Do you feel safe asking for what you need, or do you hold back to avoid rocking the boat? These questions can help you understand your attachment style in action, not just theory. So you don't have to fit neatly into one box. Many people relate to parts of more than just one style, but tuning into how you typically respond to closeness, distance, and uncertainty can give you powerful insight. And remember, this awareness is the first step toward change. So I invite you to take a moment to reflect. Do you find yourself clinging or getting really worried about your partner's feelings? Maybe that's coming from an anxious place. Do you tend to pull away or avoid emotional talks? Maybe avoidant. Or do you feel comfortable with a healthy balance? Probably secure. Understanding your style is the first step to breaking these patterns. And, a lot of people say, "Can I change my attachment style?" Well, here's the hopeful part. Yes. Attachment styles are not fixed. You can learn to feel more secure by surrounding yourself with people who are emotionally available and steady. You can also practice self-awareness. Notice your patterns without judgment. Learning to set boundaries that protect your heart instead of keeping it closed. These are all things that we can do, and they do take time. But every step toward understanding yourself is a step toward healthier love. So now is our reflection for the day. If it feels right, I invite you to try this gentle reflection. Just take some time without any distractions and reflect on your past relationships. What patterns do you notice? Ask yourself, what attachment style do I think I have? And how does that show up when I date? Write down one small change you want to try, like maybe noticing when you get anxious and taking that deep breath, or practicing saying out loud when you need space instead of shutting down. You don't have to fix everything all at once. Just notice and be kind to yourself. In closing, your relationship history doesn't have to define your future. By learning about attachment, you're already taking a huge step toward healthier, more authentic connections. Remember, it's about progress, not perfection. Surround yourself with people who help you heal, not those who keep old wounds open. You deserve relationships where you feel safe, seen, and loved, just as you are. Thank you for being here, truly. Thank you so much for listening today. If something from this episode spoke to you, I'd love to hear it. Drop a comment or share a question about a relationship that's on your mind. Big or small, your questions can spark conversations we all can learn from. And if you'd like to keep exploring these topics with me, make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss what's next. I'm grateful you're here. I'll see you next time. And until then, stay curious, stay kind, and stay connected.